I'm going to start with something that I've been upset about and raising Cain about, and so I'm going to ask you about it. And that's this right-wing extremism report that was mailed out to all law enforcement officials in the United States. And when I read through it, the reason it jumped off the page at me is the classifications of folks that we ought to be watching out for make up about 80% of my district. And I really felt that was there seemed to be it seemed to be a little different than what we really should be talking about. And of course, I represent Fort Hood, Texas, where we have 50,000 fighting men and women who are constantly protecting our nation. And many of them retire in our area and become veterans in our area. We have 2 VA hospitals within driving distance of my home. And I was very concerned about the fact that we labeled our returning veterans as possible recruiting persons for terrorism in this country in this report that I have right here with me. And I understand that you have you've said that you've apologized to the soldiers and to the military, and I understand that. But I'd just like your view on this and how it was accumulated and what reason it is that it hasn't been withdrawn and better clarified.
Well, let me, Congressman, you're right. Some things in my initial days have gone very well at the department. Some things have not, and that was probably the worst thing. I've apologized for that report. It was not authorized to be distributed. It had not even completed its vetting process within the department. It has been taken off of the Intel websites, and the lexicon that went along with it was similarly withdrawn. Neither were authorized products, and we have now put in place processes, and it turned out there were really no procedures to govern what went out and what didn't before, and now there are. And so I do not want to see a replication of that. I also met with the leadership of the American Legion. They were offended by the report. I understood that. We had a very good conversation, and we're going to work with them. For example, we are going to be providing, as you can see from the department's history and where we're heading this next fiscal year, we're still in hiring mode. We will be participating in the job fairs that the veterans are hosting to recruit among that veteran population. That's a great source of workforce for us. Indeed, I think over 25% of the department, that's probably a lowball number, irrespective of the Coast Guard aside, are military veterans. So that's a huge population for us. With that, however, one of the things we do need to do on the Intel side, and let me, if I might, share with you where I think we need to head, setting aside that mistake. Where we need to head is that the Department of Homeland Security is in a unique role. There's no other department of the federal government that has, as part of why it was created, to share information with state and local law enforcement that they can use. Most intel that you pay for, that you appropriate money for, is shared around Washington, D.C. It's shared around federal agencies. But there's really very little that goes back and forth with state and local. And that's the partnership that I talked about in my opening comments. Now, if we're going to do that, we have to turn out a quality product, and we have to turn out something that is useful to state and local. And that is the improvement process that we are embarking upon now. I look forward to the confirmation of an undersecretary for INA. We do not have one yet, but a nominee has been named by the President and others. And really being that part of value added to our whole nation's network for Homeland Security.
Well, as part of that question, clarification, I guess, I've worked with state and local police for 20 years. And I can assure you we've got some of the best and smartest and most effective police forces in Texas of anybody around. But in turn, this report has been received by those people, and if there's if nothing has been, you're right, things are heard around Washington, but if it doesn't get out of Washington, then as far as they're concerned, this report is still valid and a high priority there. That's why I asked, did you send them something? These people that all over the United States have received this thing about our veterans and about our people who believed in the Second Amendment and about the people who believed in, were opposed to abortion and so forth. Have you sent something out to these law enforcement officers so they're not targeting these individuals as they look for terrorists?
Thank you, Congressman. First of all, the report was not designed for targeting purposes. It was designed for situational awareness. Secondly, the report is off of the DHS Intel websites and all of its websites. And third, it will be, and it is in the process of being replaced or redone in a much more useful and much more precise fashion.
But if it went out to them in a written form, has it been withdrawn as in a written form? If it went out in electronic form, has it been withdrawn in electronic form? Because not everybody looks at websites.
Well, I believe that's how that information is distributed. It's
only on the website.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
I'll double check.
That's
and
fine.
it is not there anymore.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you, Ms. Roble-Allard.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the members on my side for allowing me to go first, since I have to leave.
Our allies across the border found out where the guns come from, and don't presume that they all come from the United States, because they already have reported that many of them have come from being imported for law enforcement, and then law enforcement turning to the other side, the Army turning to the other side, and so forth. So there's other issues. On the 287G issue, I believe that there's some good stats out there that are available right now showing that this has been a very effective program. You mentioned that, and I wasn't in the room, but I was told of it, that you're formalizing an agreement with ICE, DEA, CBP, ATF, and others on counter weapon smuggling. Could you give us some idea what kind of agreement that is that you're formalizing, and kind of where you think it's going?
Certainly, Representative. With respect to the gun tracing, you are right. That 90% number comes from guns actually turned over and traced, which is not the total universe of guns seized. We know that, however, a great proportion of the guns seized come from the U.S., but there are guns that are coming from other sources as well. One of the things we are working on is a better way of capturing what guns are actually used in the commission of crimes right then and there, so they can be traced quickly, which was not previously the case. With respect to working with the Attorney General, there are a number of old memorandum of understanding, MOUs. Some of them date back to the 1970s. For example, between DEA and the old INS, and before ICE even was created, that divvy up things such as, for example, Title 21 authority. They are stovepipe MOUs. They don't really reflect the modern day that we're dealing with, which is a whole region with a whole complex of problems. So there are we are engaged, the Attorney General and I, in rectifying that situation now. Senator Grassley, for example, a couple of weeks ago actually wrote me a letter asking what we were doing. There was a GAO report on some of these old MOUs, and I was pleased to report to him that we're making good progress there, and we hope to be able to announce something shortly.
Well, that's a good plan. On the issue of this worksite enforcement, 2 weeks ago, Saturday night, I was having barbecue with a Hispanic American contractor, probably the sharpest in my district, a big contractor. He's constantly turning over backwards to try to make sure that he's meeting every kind of requirement so that he's not going to get in trouble. And I don't know where he got it or what was said or what he read, but he was really concerned and expressed it to me that it looked like all the effort he'd done was going to be for nil, including going through E-Verify and other things, because it looked like that the target of the department was now employers, period, and he was really concerned about it. And he was saying that, if you do everything right, could you still end up having crimes charged against you? And of course, being an old judge, I said, of course not. There's laws, but he's worried about shutting down his business, throwing him in jail, huge fines, when he says he's done everything right, and I believe he has. That's his work ethic that he brings to the job. So I'm real interested in these things, and especially in light of this. You talked about new elements that were out there. One of them was then leaked. One of the supposedly secured documents was leaked to the New York Times. Are you aware of that? On on this new go after the employers, not the employees, and maybe this is where he got it. They were law enforcement sensitive, and you labeled them law enforcement sensitive, and they were on the new guidelines, and that they were to be kept from the public and not for public release, and yet somebody released them to the New York Times. Do you have any idea about that leak and the source of that leak, or were you aware of it?
No, but I will share with you the guidelines and how they work with respect to your constituent. If he's doing everything right and he's using E-Verify and he's got a robust I-9 process to check immigration forms, the fact of the matter is the law is very tough to prove a case against an employer. You have to show knowledge and intent to hire illegally, and that requirement is not going away. What the intent of the guidelines, however, was to say, look, it is easy to rack up numbers and just go onto a place and pick up the employees. What I want our agents to do, however, is to build cases not just against employees, but if there is an employer who's intentionally and knowingly continuing to delve into that illegal labor market, that we have a shot at bringing a winnable prosecution. And so it means really thinking through your evidence, your warrant strategy, how you're going to handle that, increasing our number of I-9 auditors that can actually go in and do more I-9 audits, which are lower paid employees than actual case agents, but help give us some inkling about where our case agents ought to be targeting to help really deal with the whole issue of the work site. But if your constituent is got a good process and he can show that he routinely uses E-Verify and I-9 and is got that all in place, then the existing federal law will not allow us to bring a prosecution.
And I agree. Build your case before you raid. But I guess the whole point is it is targeted at the employer and not the employee. So even though you may know there's 500 illegal aliens working in a place, if you don't know that he had that meets the requisite intent to prove the case, then that wouldn't be a place that you would raid.
Not necessarily. That would not necessarily be this case. We may still serve a warrant and bring in workers and interview. What did they do? How did they apply? Who did they talk to? What kind of documents did they use? What were they asked? Those sorts of things oftentimes lead to a case that can actually get you to the employer. So these are not mutually exclusive concepts. They are a matter of emphasis, however.
I'm not through. If I could, well, I'd like to expand on one question.
No, just go ahead and.
The Seattle issue is one that I'm curious about.
Yes,
Are we going to
Bellingham.
do? Is that going to be our policy that we're going to release the workers back with some kind of permit to let them work?
Let me explain that. First of all, that was not a new policy. That's the way those cases have been done for a long time. Here's what happens. You go onto a work site, you serve warrants. You want to bring a case against the employer. You need certain of the workers to be able to testify. That means they have to be able to stay in the country legally while you're getting ready to go to court. It also means that they got to be able to feed themselves while you're waiting to go to court. And so the practice has been to provide for an extended departure date for them. They're allowed to stay in the country legally for that period of time while they are cooperating. They are allowed to work during that period of time while they are cooperating. When the case is over, they are deported.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you very much. And
Well, I bet that there must have been a dozen people that have testified over the 4 years I've been on this committee that were leaving right after that testimony. Will this help us retain some of these people if we get a better, more efficient management structure?
I hope so.
I hope so too.